If you've ever gone through the process of manually adding customers in QuickBooks Online and don't want to sit there adding multiple customers at the same time, I have some fantastic news. And that is the fact that QuickBooks actually allows you to bulk upload customer data into QuickBooks Online. So it really cuts down on data entry and time spent just keying things in. But that being said, this process is one that you have to be very careful with because it is very easy to accidentally map data to the wrong location, like accidentally assigning a fax number to a phone number field. And QuickBooks doesn't have a lot of guardrails when it comes to possibly duplicating customer data entry. So it's really important to take this process slowly and methodically to ensure that it's actually saving you time, not causing you cleanup and hassle later. So let's go ahead and dive into how we would actually go through this process. So in order to bulk add customers, we're going to go into our customer hub, what used to be called the customer center. Okay, so if I click on customer hub right here on the upper menu, or if I go over to all apps and then customer hub, I can select customers and leads from these drawers. Okay, so I can select customers and leads right here, and we can see from this left-hand navigation menu, if I had selected Customer Hub, it would have come up with the overview, and I would have just had to select customers and leads right below that, okay? So it automatically puts us into the body of our customer center. If I scroll up a little bit, we can see there is information up here at the top, but it automatically brings us right into the name section of our customer center, okay? So how do we go about importing information into QuickBooks? Well, we can go right up here where it says new customer, and instead of clicking on the new customer button, we're going to select the caret just to the right of that. And we then have the option to import customers. Okay, once we select import customers, we are brought to this screen. Okay. Here is where things get a little bit possibly dicey, okay? There are a couple different ways we can go about this. First, we can browse and bring in a file into the software here, okay? That is great, and we definitely want to examine that. If this is the first time you're doing this, I highly recommend downloading the sample file here so that you can see the format that QuickBooks accepts and what the names of the various categories are, okay? That is the key portion of mapping all of this data in so that it lands correctly in the file, okay? Additionally, you can actually basically connect Google Sheets to bring this information in. So what I always recommend to my clients is that they have a standard customer intake form that gathers all of the pertinent information that they need about their clients. Okay. Now, QuickBooks has fields for way more information than you will likely need for your clients when it comes to just having their data in the file. For example, there is still a fax number field. I don't know of all that many clients who still have or use fax numbers that aren't just digital. So whether or not you need a fax number field, that is neither here nor there, but it is an option in the file, okay? You do not have to have that as a field on your intake forms, though. You can tailor it to only bring in information that you want to see in your customer center, okay? So for example, if I download this sample file right here, I'm going to see that we have name, company name, phone number, mobile number. We have address, city, state, zip, street, country, all of that. We also have fax numbers. We have websites. We have emails. We have tons and tons of fields. And again, there are sections that I usually end up deleting off of my Excel sheets because I just don't need that information in there. You do not have to map information to every category. Okay, so if you download that sample file and see something in there that you will never use, you certainly do not have to have that as part of your criteria. Okay, I actually do have a Google form that I use as a client intake, right? And that allows me to have an Excel sheet in Google Sheets with all of this information. So every so often I can just bring customer data in from that Google Sheet. Okay. It makes life a lot easier. But you do still have the option to do these static uploads. So for example, if you have a Google Sheet and you're collecting information, or if you have another software that is collecting this information, you could export that information to Excel, say once a month or once a quarter, or on whatever basis makes most sense to you, and then import it into QuickBooks if that is necessary, okay? So let's go ahead and move on to the next step here, which is actually bringing the file that we want to import into QuickBooks. So I'm going to select Browse right here, and then I'm going to select the Excel file that I want to see, and that is going to pop up right here. Once I have the Excel file in, I can go ahead and hit Next. Now, here is where it is worth taking some time and double checking a few things, okay? You can see right here, we have our fields. This is what is showing up on my Excel sheet. So I have imported this Excel sheet. QuickBooks has read the data, okay? It has picked up that there are headings on this Excel sheet, and it has offered me the match that it thinks most closely resembles that field in QuickBooks. Okay, so you can see there are some instances of some slight variation. For example, when we look at province, region, state, we just have state on our Excel sheet. When we see zip code in QuickBooks, we just have zip on our Excel sheet. Okay, those kinds of differences are not material, right? Obviously, zip is just short for zip code. So that is totally fine. But we want to be really careful and we want to be watchful of these fields going to the correct place. Okay, so for example, if we had cell number, we would want to make sure that that was matching up with the mobile category in QuickBooks. If we had primary phone number in our Excel sheet, we would want to make sure that was matching up with the phone number in QuickBooks. So this is a great place to do a little double check here, okay? So go through, make sure these little green check marks basically let you know that QuickBooks thinks there is a high confidence match here, okay? Now you can see this is what I was talking about. There are some fields that I just happen to not use when it comes to my customers and importing information. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them or that they aren't applicable to your business, but for the purposes of this example, we're not going to dive into every single category here, okay? Additionally, you do not have to bring in all of these fields. Let's say, for example, that I didn't want to bring in fax numbers. I could instead select no match, and we can see that check mark went away. So now it is not going to bring fax numbers into the file. I'll go ahead and leave that particular example in, okay? But this one down here, customer type, I actually don't have customer types set up in this QuickBooks file yet. So I don't want to bring customer types in on this import. So I'm going to go ahead and select no match here so that it will not bring that information in, okay? Once you have confirmed that all of the data is mapped the way you want it to, and it never hurts to have the Excel sheet up on another screen or even printed in front of you as you are looking through this to confirm that everything is coming through the way you would like, okay? Once you've done that, you can go ahead and hit Next down there in the bottom right-hand corner, okay? Now, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of it, okay? It has basically taken all the information in that Excel sheet and it has broken it out in the way it thinks I should import it. Okay, so it took our website section and put a website, if it was present in the Excel sheet, into this field. It took their address, it took their city, state, zip code, all of that information, and it brought it into this grid. Okay. So this is a really great place to pause and do a little spot check, okay? Make sure that your fax numbers ended up where you wanted them to. Make sure your mobile numbers ended up where you wanted them to. Do a quick double check, especially if you have international clients, that it brought through the information for, say, state, province, etc., correctly, okay? And you can see down here, we have, in Canada, the zip codes are 6 digits. Right? So we want to be sure that all of that information came through correctly. Okay. Now we can see here, there is not information in every single field, and that is perfectly okay. All right. Maybe we don't have a fax number for a lot of our clients. And again, that one wouldn't be a big surprise, but maybe we also just don't have websites for everybody. We can see some people didn't provide us with email addresses. Okay. So it is entirely possible that we might not have every single field on this grid filled out, and that is absolutely fine. But if you see a field on here that isn't filled out and you have that information, you can manually add it in any of these fields. Okay. A final item here is that, again, you want to do a quick scan and see if there is any duplicate customer data being brought in. Okay. Now, this is kind of a test on my part. I added Grace Holloway right here. There's already a Grace Holloway in my company file. All of the information is the same, okay? So at this point, QuickBooks is not flagging this as a possible duplicate. I am going to go ahead and leave Grace Holloway checked to see if QuickBooks is going to allow me to import that duplicate data or if it ends up doing a quick scan to warn me, okay? So once you've confirmed all this, once you have checked that everything is coming in the way that you would expect it to, once you have confirmed that all fields that you have information for are filled, you can opt to bring it in. So once I have all this information in, I can click done. Okay. And as we can see, it is, oh, and look at this. It actually did flag it. So that is really cool. I'm very glad to see it. This right here, it flagged Grace Holloway because it did a quick search and it confirmed that her name was already present in my QuickBooks file. So it's asking me if I want to add it again, okay? Since I know this is all the same information because I created this Excel sheet, I do not want to add her. So that is fantastic that QuickBooks has that feature available and that it is cutting down on duplicates, okay? It is also possible, though, that maybe you have a customer that has multiple companies, right? Maybe you do actually need to have a separate customer profile for each of their companies. So the name alone might not be an indication that it is a duplicate, okay? So we unchecked her. We're going to go ahead and hit done right here. And it brought 17 of the 18 customers that were in my Excel sheet into the file. So now we have, let's see, Liam Fraser, that was a new one, right? And they are all here in line. So that is fantastic. And that is exactly what we would want to see, okay? Now you can see while it takes a second to go through and make sure that everything is mapped correctly and confirm all of the information and do a quick double check and a spot check, that was a much quicker process than sitting there and clicking new customer and entering all the information this way, right? Very different, much more streamlined process. Okay, not something that necessarily works for every single item. And if you only have one customer that you're adding, maybe it's not worth it to go through the import, the work of doing the import and making sure all that information is in an Excel sheet that can be brought in. But for a group of customers, it is definitely a huge time saver and can make your life a lot easier. Okay. Now, again, this isn't necessarily something that you're going to be doing on a daily basis in your file. The only times that I have ended up using it for myself or my customers is when it comes to things like starting a QuickBooks Online file where there is a QuickBooks Desktop file, but the CPA, for one reason or another, decided that they didn't want to do a direct import. Okay. Sometimes if you have had a QuickBooks Desktop file for decades, and I have clients who have had their QuickBooks Desktop file for, 20 plus years, sometimes there are errors and issues in the file that the CPA isn't necessarily going to want to bring forward into the new file. There are also times when you're going to run up against size limitations when it comes to importing a QuickBooks Desktop file. So sometimes decisions have to be made. Okay, I actually used this import feature on one such instance where the CPA had decided that they didn't want to bring a whole bunch of historical data in and they wanted to have a fresh slate in QuickBooks Online. So I worked with the client to basically do an export of all of their customers from QuickBooks Desktop. And it was a massive Excel sheet, let me tell you. I think it had over 1,000 lines on it because they had been in business for, like I said, decades. And we went through and we made sure that all of the information was correct. We matched it up with the fields here in QuickBooks Online, and we were able to do that full import. okay? Now, that saved us a ton of time, and it allowed for their historical data to come in so that if the customer called, they were able to look them up in the file and have all of their contact information and shipping information at their fingertips instead of having to go back into the old file. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments.